It's okay if we have a little bit of a lead in. Look at that. Look at that. I'm just letting it go. I'm just letting it go. Just let it go. Just let it go. All right, we're going to dive right in.
I feel like we're about to break into Celine Dion singing.
Oh, goodness. That would drive more people away than I would think.
It is a horror unto itself.
In order to summon Cthulhu, we began with the Celine Dion, and then we discussed the intricacies of werewolves in 4th grade. Anyway, welcome to It Began in the Basement. I'm Megan.
I'm Laura.
And tell us why we're here today, Laura.
We're here today to discuss horror in all of its grotesque beauty.
I love horror, but we have slightly different focuses. For me, it's more ghost stories, haunted houses, cabins in the woods, anything that's kind of spooky, a ghosty way, but doesn't really tread into the realm of demons. On the other side of that, I love any kind of classic horror monster, especially werewolves. I was very convinced in 4th grade that if I just worked really hard, I could be a werewolf when I grew up.
And I still believe, to this day, one day, when I grow up, I will get to be a mythologist as an actual paid position. It's just about as believable as becoming a werewolf.
I don't know, the werewolf might be easier.
I personally think it's summed up best by the quote from Professor Broom in the first Hellboy movie, where he said, "There are things that go bump in the night, Agent Myers, and we are the ones who bump back."
Which is a good example of an overlap for us. It has mythology, it has nerdy comic books, has good illustration, and it gave us a really great campy movie that we both love.
This podcast is really an exploration of the creepy, the spooky, and the unusual.
So you might be wondering what made us this way, and you are in luck because we've had about a week to reflect on this as we planned out this episode. I have a prepared statement about the mild trauma that my school-time field trips gave me, and Laura is going to just recite some memories from her lovely haunted childhood home.
May the gods have mercy on our souls.
No, I don't think we have to worry about that. To start us off, I'm going to talk about some of the field trips I took in grade school that definitely made me the way I am. I was really glad that I got to do a little more research on this because even though I went on these field trips and there were a lot of plaques, I was 8, so I didn't read them. And if I hadn't had to do any research, I never would have picked up this lovely book entitled History of Erie County, Pennsylvania, containing a history of the county, its townships, towns, villages, schools, churches, industries, etc., portraits of early settlers and prominent men, biographies, history of Pennsylvania, statistical and miscellaneous matter, etc., etc., Volume 1. So General Mad Anthony Wayne was a Revolutionary War general, statesman, and he was a member of the House of Representatives. He had a pretty impressive career. There are a ton of places named after him across the United States. So if you came from a Waynesville or lived in Wayne County or even have a Wayne Street in your town, he's probably the reason. His nickname seems to have come from either his fiery personality and tendency to move towards the front line during battle, or as an accusation from one of his subordinates, a man by the name of Wandering Jemmy, who was a failed spy. Either way, the name caught on, and it was encouraged by novelist Washington Irving after the Revolutionary War. If you love American history, he's definitely worth looking up. But because this is a podcast about horror, I'll let you do that research on your own. While Mad Anthony accomplished quite a bit in his life, his death could have been due to a number of factors. He'd had malaria, he'd been shot with musket balls several times, and he had no worry about rich food or wine. There was also a chance that he was poisoned by rival General James Wilkinson. The worst of it, though, was probably the development of gout. And this worsened during his trip from his headquarters in Pittsburgh to Detroit and then to Presque Isle, which is in Erie. He was pulled from his ship and taken to the Army blockhouse in a last-ditch effort for a recovery. He sent for his doctor in Pittsburgh, but the doctor didn't arrive in time. General Wayne died on December 15th, 1796, at the age of 51. He wanted to be buried 2 days after his death in his best uniform at the foot of the post blockhouse flagpole. His burial was to be simple, just a plain coffin with the only distinguishing features being his name and age hammered in brass tacks. So years later, in the autumn of 1808, General Wayne's daughter fell really ill and asked that her brother retrieve her father's remains so that they could be buried in the family plot. This was over 300 miles from Erie, and so Colonel Isaac Wayne, the son, returned to Erie with a small cart to appease his sister's wishes. After all, it had been just over 12 years, and that should have been enough time for a body to decompose. All that would need to be transported was a pile of bones, and those could easily be tucked away in a bag or chest. But once the coffin's lid was pried open, it was found the body had barely decomposed at all. It was incredibly well preserved, save for one leg that had rotted away. The body couldn't be moved back to Radnor on the small cart that General Wayne's son had brought, and with the two cities being so far apart, it wasn't a trip that anyone wanted to make twice. Dr. Wallace, the doctor that had not been able to attend General Wayne immediately before his death, proposed that the body be placed in a large kettle and boiled so that the bones could be separated from the flesh and easily taken back to the Wayne family plot. Okay, it's a little grisly from here, so if you are not comfortable with gore, cover your ears for a few minutes. Okay, go. Isaac Wayne did not stick around to watch the body be dug up and prepared for movement. Instead, Dr. Wallace, at least 4 assistants, and some very helpful onlookers began their work. Despite the gruesome task of disassembling a boiled body, it doesn't seem like anyone helping was at all put off. Even though one of the legs had basically dissolved, the other one was fine. In fact, the boot on that leg looked good enough for one of the onlookers to pluck it off, take it to a cobbler, and have a match made. Another participant, the wife of Captain Dobbins, was living on the grounds at the time. She and her lady friends watched the spectacle. Mrs. Dobbins even plucked a lock of General Wayne's hair as a keepsake. The body, she said, was, quote, not hard like stone, but was the consistency of soft chalk. The hairs of the head pulled out readily, and the general appearance of the corpse was much like that of a plaster of Paris cast. Henry Whitney, another observer, stated that the flesh on his backbone was 4 inches thick, solid and firm like new pork. He knew this because the body would not fit in the kettle. Thus, it was cut into smaller pieces before it was boiled, giving everyone plenty of time to look at its composition. Dr. Wallace and those assisting waited for the flesh to become loose enough in the boiling pot to scrape away the bone and flesh and used their instruments to separate the meat. The boiled, fleshy remains were then returned to the coffin, and it was buried once more. The variety of tools used to do the deed were also dumped into the coffin before it was sealed and reinterred. And if you've been fast-forwarding for some reason like, I don't know, you're eating, you can continue on now. It is said that General Wayne's son wished that he had simply left the body in Erie once he found out how it had been disassembled. It's unknown if he actually agreed to the process or if Dr. Wallace just went ahead with it. But Isaac did return with the bones to Radnor, Pennsylvania, and deposited them at the family plot at St. David's Episcopal Church. To this day, there's a monument on the site of Mad Anthony's second place of burial. So that's all the serious stuff. Those are the actual official things that happened. Of course, it wouldn't be as fun if we just stopped there. Legend has it that Mad Anthony's son did not pack the bones terribly well. It was a long and bumpy ride back to Radnor. It is said that those bones dropped out along Route 322, leaving General Wayne incomplete. On January 1st every year, which is the General's birthday, his ghost rides a phantom steed up and down the road from Erie to Radnor, trying to recover the missing parts of himself. Okay, on to a couple nerdy things. Laura, did you know that Mad Anthony Wayne is supposed to be the ancestor of Bruce Wayne, also known as Batman?
Okay, but, where did you find that?
It is actually on Batman's Wikipedia page. It's the common conception is that it's John Wayne that they're named after, but it's actually supposed to be Mad Anthony Wayne, and Wayne Manor is supposed to be built on land that Mad Anthony Wayne got as a reward for participating in the Revolutionary War.
America.
Yeah, that is, it's very American, as is Batman. There's also a beer known as Mad Anthony Ale that's brewed by the Erie Brewing Company in my hometown. So if you like bottles of beer that feature skeletons and fancy hats, or you just plain like APAs, you should give it a shot. So the relevance of all this was that this was one of the many stops that we went on our budget field trips when I was in school. A lot of the other ones were cemeteries or old mansions with other creepy dummies. But the blockhouse itself is the main event for this particular stop. It's not the original one. It's been set on fire a couple of times and rebuilt since the Revolutionary War. I think the most recent one was in the mid-'80s. So it's not the real one. But you can still go visit it. And if you want to do that, you are welcome to go to the Blockhouse in Erie, Pennsylvania. It's next to a soldiers' and sailors' home, and you have to go in there to get a key. There is no power, so I would recommend going during the day. It's also a little terrifying as a school child to go in there and see the dummy of Mad Anthony Wayne sitting on the chair he died on with a wig and a hat that both don't stay on. Also in there, there's a kettle. It's not the original one that he was boiled on, but it's a similar one. And there's a little paper water line in there that's blue, and there's a bunch of little cartoony bones on top of it. You could,
Amazing.
yeah,
10 out
we
of
take
10.
this very seriously. And so there's also the top of the casket, and a lot of the other girls were just like, ew, when we were in there, and I was so happy. I was like, ooh, this is pretty great. I don't want to be in here alone, but I like it. So that is kind of the explanation for why I am the way I am, that and Catholicism. So, Laura, would you like to tell us about the haunted house you grew up in?
So the house I grew up in, where my mother still currently resides, as I'm sure she'll appreciate me mentioning now, was built in the 1940s, so it's that charming age of around 75 years. Now, when I was a kid, I remember maybe I was around 5 or 6 at the time, and where my bedroom was the bathroom was at the end of the hall, then it was my bedroom and then my parents' bedroom. Right before I moved to the bedroom at the end of the hall, past my parents' bedroom, there was a night where I saw the silhouettes of a bunch of the things I own, like stuffed animals, that kind of thing. They started moving. And this is from the light is from the perspective of being down in the corner. So you're just seeing this, and I might have dreamed it for all I know. I mean, kids and active imaginations, hey. But I do distinctly remember, shortly after that happening, my parents moved me down the hall. My inner spooky nerd would be like, is that a coincidence? Which entirely likely it probably is.
Did you
But
ever ask them about it?
actually, I haven't, and I probably should.
Let's call your mom.
Yeah, totally.
It's 12:12 on a Sunday. Let's call Laura's mom.
Because she totally won't think that I'm dead, my car blew up or anything like
Well,
that.
there's a horror story. Continuing on. Yeah.
Anyway, so after I moved to the bedroom down the hall, and that's where all, like, my stacks of books are now and all that stuff. So when my dad got home from working at Home Depot late at night and he would be laying awake in bed, he would see me walk down the hallways. Even when it's really dark out, you can still see motion, if somebody waves their arms or something like that. And he's told me in the past he would wait maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes and I wouldn't come out of the bathroom. So naturally, he would be concerned, so he'd go down to the bathroom and there's nobody there. Now, I do believe they're called shadow people or something like that, but it is an actual, not recorded phenomenon, but it's a thing that other people have seen or at least, had experience with. And I've seen them myself before too, and it's only ever upstairs. And this is going to sound like a friend of a friend story, so it's not that great. But these things only ever happen in the house when everybody is either away or they're asleep. I remember one time also, I think my mother was at work and my dad was out running errands, and I was sitting downstairs, and I was probably a teenager, and I heard people talking in the living room. Like muffled, maybe you keep the TV on low as background noise level, but it was a woman and a man talking, and I'm fairly certain my father also heard that too, but I'd have to check with him. And any of this phenomenon, maybe it was sound that traveled weirdly from the neighborhood, can't say, but it was only ever residual. It was never active. It was almost like the type of quote-unquote haunting that would be like in the memory of a place. And I sort of like to personally entertain that idea because the house is 75 years old. I mean, it was younger then,
well, I mean,
obviously.
that's how old that house is. Who knows what was on that land before?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not saying that's what it is 100%, but to have somebody else experience it and then we both compared notes, like it felt more validating. And in that same vein, I got to go to Gettysburg more than once when I was a kid. And Gettysburg is one of those places that's amazing to go, especially during the fall, because it's just this amazing atmospheric experience. Personally, remember going as a kid, and obviously being a kid, you don't know what the fuck you're in the middle of. While you're there, but I remember going there with my mom and her friend Pat, and this isn't necessarily paranormal, but the park was about to close. I feel like it was around sunset, and there is a guy in blue union dress riding a horse, and he comes riding out of the field, and all of us are just like, and I think he just informed us that the park was closing and we needed to go to the entrance, and I'm like, kind of horrified.
I know you guys can't see the face that Laura is making, but It is the face where if you opened up your fridge, there would be a head inside.
Yes, exactly. And I think that same trip, I remember touching a big boulder. I feel like it was a marker of something, and it was in a clearing, so the sun should have been beating down on
Mhm.
it all day, even with the chill of fall in the air. That was as cold as ice. And it might have just been an environmental factor, but being a kid, like, and in such a place at such a time, like, that really kind of messes with your mind. I think also it's had a lot of impact on me over the years is going to places like Gettysburg and getting those really cheesy VHS tapes that are like ghost stories from Gettysburg, and like the
Mhm.
actors are all just like cake white makeup and be like, this is a ghost because they're radioactively white. I'm like, okay, I can roll with this. But when you're watching that stuff as a kid, it gives you nightmares. And
Mhm.
I think just that combination of things, and also going out west a lot as a kid, like Arizona, Wyoming, South Dakota, more you'll see in Arizona, there are whole abandoned gold mines and gold digging towns,
Mhm.
relics of buildings that are left from the 1800s, and it looks like, there still could be something there. It's that kind of creepy vibe that you get, that it's like it makes the hairs raise on the back of your neck. Beyond that, I find personally interesting about the mythological perspective of things is that we still engage in storytelling. Having the belief system now is optional. I don't really have an opinion about that either way. But with horror stories, we still want to be scared. We still
Yeah.
want to have this fear and explore these different avenues of ourselves. And I think storytelling is a very good way of doing that.
But it's also in a safe way. Like a lot of these ghost stories
Bingo.
and horror stories, you are never in any actual danger. It's like riding a roller coaster. I mean, there's a small chance, I guess, that it could go off the rails. And if you do believe that speaking about ghosts or hearing about ghosts is something that will bring them into your life, then yes, you are taking that small risk. However, I don't think either of us believe that at all. So
No, and
we're
I
good.
think definitely it's the thrill is definitely part of it. Also, I think when we look at horror stories and stuff and watch horror movies, we're actually able to participate in a part of ourselves that's not really allowed out in a socially acceptable manner.
For example, not many people will actually kill another human being with an axe during their lifetime. But when you're watching a movie about that, you oftentimes end up seeing things through the eyes of the killer.
When you have that forced perspective change, when the characters you might be rooting for just drop like flies one after the other, and then you're finally left with the forced perspective from the killer's outlook, you're kind of left wondering, like, how should I feel about that? Like, for me, I feel ill at ease, generally speaking.
Well, for me, also, when I watch these movies, most of the protagonists or kind of pseudo protagonists are asshole teenagers. So in the end, after you see them, I don't know, completely ignore a kid while he say drowns off a pier, you might not feel so bad for them when their mother dons an outfit and murders every single one of them at a certain camp on a certain lake. Anyway, on that note, we're going to call it a night since it's almost 1 in the morning. So, we're bidding you goodbye from my basement where there's only a small chance that an old woman died before I moved here.
Really.
Yeah, when I bought the house, they said that the grandmother lived in this room, and we will show you guys pictures of this room at some point. I would maybe call it semi finished. There are
Mm.
parts of the walls that they've put painted wood boards over what I know is cinder block, and there's a tiny little bathroom. And apparently, the grandma did not move out when the rest of the family did. I don't know what happened, but when I moved in here, I also found a bag with a wedding dress and a meat cleaver in it. So there's all kinds of potential for this house.
Well, maybe we'll have company for next week's episode.
Oh, God, I hope not. Anyway, good night, everyone. We'll see you next week.